go. All right, hello, and thank you everyone so much for agreeing to participate in this men's panel discussing the topic of domestic violence and how men play an important role in allyship, prevention, and reduction of domestic violence. We'll get to introductions in just a moment, but I'd like to give a few pieces of information first. My name is Julia Fisher, my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm a counselor in RCC's counseling department. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and the counseling department is offering a number of events to bring awareness and educational opportunities to domestic violence. We have partnered with Associated Student Government, who's providing 4 $25 gift cards to Fred Meyer for a handful of events over the course of the month. Please visit the counseling webpage for further information, and I will put that link in the chat. Once you go to the counseling webpage, you'll want to click on the mental health awareness events tile, and that will take you to the webpage regarding the events with Associated Student Government. It's important for me to acknowledge that some of the topics covered here today may feel triggering to some folks. Please remember that if you're a registered RCC student, you have access to an RCC counselor Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. should you feel like you'd like to talk to a trained mental health professional. To get an immediate contact with an RCC counselor during these hours, email counselingfrontdesk@roguecc.edu or call 541-956-7443, and I will also put that in the chat. If you're a community member or a student watching this after hours and need support, please reach out to one of the 24-hour crisis lines. In Josephine County, that number is 541-474-5360. In Jackson County, that number is 541-774-8201. And you can also call Community Works. They have a 24-hour crisis line, which is 541-779-HELP. Okay, so we are ready to get started. How about each of you introduce yourself by giving your name and your job title. If you work here at RCC or if you're a student, identify yourself as a student and share what it is you're studying. How about I'll pick someone? Tom, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Hi, my name's Tom Pike, and I'm a counselor here at Rogue Community College, typically on the Medford campus, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. And Vern, how about you?
I'm Vern Underwood. I'm chair of the humanities department, and I've been at the college now for 26 years, and my office is on the Riverside campus where I do all my teaching.
All right, thank you. And Garrett?
I'm Garrett Blake Smith. I work at RCC Redwood campus as a lab aide. I am currently, as I stated before, I am going for my computer support technician associate's degree.
Okay, thank you. And Jeremy?
Hello, I'm Jeremy Taylor. I'm a full-time faculty member at the college, been here 20 years now. I am in the computer science department and in information technologies.
All right, thank you. And Levi?
Hi, I'm Levi. I am both a student and an employee. I do tutoring for mainly math. I am in the human services cohort and plan on being eventually a doctor, but I just want to get out in the community and help people.
Awesome, thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate your time. So I have some questions to ask, and I'm going to read them out loud, but then I will also put them in the chat. That way you can refer back to them, and then we'll just kind of let conversation flow naturally. So my first question is, Jackson Katz, a major figure in the growing global movement of men working to promote gender equality and prevent gender violence, has said, quote, "Violence against women is a men's issue." What are your thoughts about this statement? And maybe I might also ask, what feelings come up for you when you hear that statement?
Well, if I could start, I'd say I totally see that, because I think although victims of abuse can be, there's male on male, there's female on female, and there's female on male. I think male on female is the most prevalent form. And so just read this article where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is talking about racism. She says a very vital importance of white people getting in on the discussion, and they may be reticent to do so because they feel like I'm no expert on race. This doesn't affect me. I don't want to intrude. And she says your voice is necessary as part of allyship. So I think that's in the spirit. It sounds like the spirit of what Jackson Katz is after, is that we need everybody to show clearly their feelings about this. And since men are the primary perpetrators against women, it seems like men should be the ones speaking out about it.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I always feel that Western medicine, and I know I'm getting bold there, we deal with the symptoms, but not the root causes. What are our root causes that get men to this location where it's okay or justified to take the violent hand against any victim out there? And we talk about, I know gun violence is not on our docket today, but where does that also come from? That we can look at the root causes of this anger or this lashing out that causes men to feel this behavior is acceptable in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point about looking at the cause, and whether it's some sort of anger or frustration. And no matter what the cause is, there needs to be some sort of solution that's usually, personally learned about, how to respond in a way that's appropriate, that's not violent. Maybe it's just leaving the room. Maybe it's, understanding our own biology well enough. Like I know for myself that if I start getting, triggered, or I start getting adrenaline in my system, I can tell that I'm not thinking well, and have learned that I just need to take some time to cool off, think more clearly. So no matter what the cause, certainly addressing those causes is kind of a primary concern, and understanding, even if that cause hasn't been fully addressed, how to cope and not like lash out and be violent is part of it, big part. And then speaking to Jackson's thing about, whether this is a men's issue or a women's issue, it certainly is a men's issue. When we're talking about, men on women kind of violence, and learning to speak out in a way, like it's really difficult to confront somebody, whether it's on, about racism or whatever kind of ism, or in this case, violence. Like if there's a kind of a traditional accepted, feeling in the male community that this isn't a big issue, or if somebody says something in your circle of friends, it's awkward to like say something about that. Like we need to be learning how to say something, but say it in a way that's actually helping people change course. Because when I've like said things in public spaces, when I'm triggered by somebody else maybe being racist or whatever it is, like it doesn't help. It doesn't help. That just gets everybody angry. So how do we confront this issue in a way that's useful and beneficial to move the conversation forward is a big question.
I have a little bit of personal experience with this kind of thing, and I've actually put a lot of thought into it. I agree that it is mainly a men's issue, but I kind of am leaning on what Vern said about it's kind of everybody's issue. I think there needs to be more awareness around it and more education on it. I'm not trying to victim shame at all, but women are held accountable to some of the portion of responsibility because they could leave. And I know that's probably a bad thing to say, or might be not popular opinion, but I think that even though there's some emotional attachment, or maybe there's children involved, or there's all kinds of different scenarios, but the victim part of it, whether it's the male or the female, or same-sex violence, whatever, the victim has the choice of leaving, and I think having support systems out there, or some kind of, like I said, more awareness surrounding it, that they may feel more empowered to leave, and that would really dampen domestic violence, I think.
And can I speak to a bit of that, Levi? My wife worked for the Dunn House for years ago, and so I got like schooled on the cycle of violence and all of that. And that's a very common perception, like, why do you stay with them? But my understanding, I used to have a speaker come to my class, and they said, if an abuser, so abuse is a learned behavior. It's not just, hey, I'm frustrated today, so though I just feel like hitting somebody, and there's my spouse. It's like it's you've seen this happen in your household. Your father beat on your mother. And so there's a grooming process, because she said, this speaker, like, if domestic violence occurred on the first date, we would not have a problem with domestic violence, because you would be like, never again. And this grooming is slowly eroding somebody's sense of self, slowly isolating them from everyone else. I mean, I feel like most of us will never witness physical domestic violence, so we could see cues of it in behaviors, because there's even something called target hitting, where the abuse is such that there's no proof. It'll be either hitting somewhere where a woman is not going to show you, or hitting her where it can't be seen, like on the head. And it's just this really insidious, complex learned behavior of about grooming, finding a victim. She says an abuser can find a victim across the room. They just know. It's like a predator, like watching a show, like, that's the deer I'm going to go get. And then they pull them in with all this love and romance, and they slowly make them feel less and less and less, and isolate them from things, until finally that person cannot imagine that they amount to anything. They would never leave. I'm nothing. I'm crap. And that's when they have them. And so once a woman leaves, her risks of death increase. She is at more risk of something terrible happening than when she was with the abuser. And so I mean, this is just what I've been told, so I'm not an expert on this. So.
Yeah, Vernon,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
everything you're saying is completely accurate and true. And I want to just quickly speak to what you said about a perpetrator being able to really identify a victim. And I've had, clients that I've worked with say that exact thing, that they felt it. Like, once they were in the relationship and they look back, they're like, he saw me, and he saw me for who I was and what I had been through, and targeted me because he could see my trauma. And so, you're really right in that I think if a man is a batterer, he knows what to look for in a person to be able to position them in a way that benefits his needs, right? Or what he's looking for. But sorry, Levi, please go ahead.
Oh no, at the beginning of me saying, I said I had some experience. I didn't mean it as in I'm a batterer. I mean, I grew up in a house with domestic violence against my mother. I've seen the behavior in other family members. I've noticed the patterns myself, and I know for me and my family, what had worked was she, had to cut ties. She had to shut down all emotional, with respect to us kids. She of course she did it for us, but it was for her at the same time. That's what I've seen work, and that's why I say, they do have a choice, but I totally understand what Vern is saying as well. It's a learned behavior, and I've used this analogy before, cooking a frog. Being in the situation, the way to cook a frog is to put them in cold water and slowly heat it up until it's too hot for them to get out and it boils. Whereas, us as humans, we don't see that. We just, the learned behavior, we do the same thing. We stay in the situation until it's too late. And yeah, there's emotional attachments. And like I said, kids, there's all kinds of different scenarios. I'm, again, not victim blaming. I just think there could be brought more awareness and more support systems for those that feel like they are stuck in that cycle. And, maybe that's something like the Dunn House. I have heard of it, but I've never looked into it. I think that yeah, maybe I need more education as well.
Sounds like maybe, Levi, what you're saying is that maybe there's not enough options for when someone would like to leave, that there's not enough societal support to help folks live that out, right? Like it can be,
Well, maybe not necessarily not enough options, but maybe they don't know that the options are even there. I think that could be a big part of it, is that, you know, and again, I am not trying to take away from blame for it being a majority of men that are abusing in spousal relationships, because it is. And I just think that as human beings, we all hold some responsibility for bad situations, and there's things that can be done. And I think that not being aware of what can be done could be a big stigma on it too.
Yeah, I think there's also an issue with, you know, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I know that domestic violence affects people with lower income than higher income. And the actual fact of leaving with your kids, without your kids, is a lot harder for somebody without resources or support. So that makes it even, you know, especially for that population, even more challenging.
Another issue? Can I bring up another issue? So another issue is the definition of a victim is determined by the judicial system. I'm speaking specifically the DA. The said person can determine who is a victim, who is not. And if you don't have a proper or appropriate defense, even though you're a victim, you can be the defendant, which is a terrifying prospect that my mother went through. She's incarcerated. That's why I have certain experience with this extreme issue.
yeah, so you're speaking about someone protecting themselves when they're in a situation, and then because they protected themselves, then they are now perpetrators, quote unquote, of a crime.
They are expected to run out. If there is a window behind you, you must jump through it, even if it's made of glass and solid. That type of thing makes me frustrated.
Hmm. Yeah, I could understand why you're frustrated. That sounds kind of like a terrible situation.
It's really a non-choice choice, right? Which I think is a lot of what can be true for someone who's in a relationship where there's violence, depending on the factors. You know, if you might want to leave, but they've said they'll hurt the children if you do, and they'll hunt you down, or they'll find your family members, or get you in trouble at work, or all kinds of manipulations. And so it's like, it might seem like there's a choice, but it's kind of a non-choice choice, because neither option is good.
So with that statement I made, my point is it would be awesome if there was some way we can have better representation, significantly better representation.
I think too, if you think of it as a men's issue, I don't know that men have to come out and say, I'm against domestic violence, because nobody's for it. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, I think that woman deserved that. I mean, but I think the training, if I think of a physician seeing somebody who has classic symptoms, like, oh, you've got this, I know exactly I can diagnose you right now. I don't have any firsthand experience with victims of abuse, but I knew a bunch of people that worked at the Dunn House. And when a woman starts telling her experience, they could almost cut in and finish the story for her. It's so predictable. Oh, I'll bet he said this. I'll bet he said this. Oh, and then after it happened, I'm certain he brought you flowers. And like, yeah. And I think the more people see this is the behavior of because I think an abuser is a broken person. They're not an evil man. We're talking man in this case. They grew up in a household where they witnessed this, and this becomes, you know, the behavior. And so they're broken and very unlikely to get fixed from everything I've read. And so if if women, find the vulnerable woman or find the vulnerable victim, but if the more people know, sort of like a zombie movie, that's a zombie, blood and all of that. And the more you know exactly what an abuser is going to do, and it'll take a while, but it'll start catching on. Like somebody that's a little overly romantic and over the top. I mean, instead of being like, oh my gosh, it's Romeo, it's like, no, no, this is unusual behavior. And they start, and then when the abuse starts, the criticisms, the isolating from family and friends, it'll be, I know exactly what's happening. And maybe that would be an education piece that would help break that cycle.
Kind of teaching people about the red flags, what to watch out for. And yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
And, I think that goes back to like teaching children, what healthy relationships look like. Because if they're not witnessing that in their own personal lives for whatever reason, it's hard then for those kids as they grow up to know how they should expect to be treated and how they should treat others as well, right? And so I saw, Garrett, you wrote in there, sounds systemic. Yeah, and it kind of speaks, Jeremy, like to what you were saying, the root cause, right? So it's like, where do we begin to try to undo damage that's been done?
Yeah, in middle school, what toxic masculinity means, and boys don't cry, and boys solve their problems with this, and it's just it just goes way back to how we're taught.
Well, and like I was saying, that I went exactly the opposite direction. I learned from those toxic relationships that my mother was in on how not to act, honestly. But I know that not every kid out there is going to think that way. I just saw so much abuse from very young childhood to teen years to, realize that I don't ever want that. I saw my mom go through it. I don't ever want to put somebody else through that. I don't ever. I saw how not to act.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot too, right? Of like you're saying, you were able to say, oh, this is not good. I don't want this for myself. I don't want to act this way. I don't want to, if I decide to have kids, I don't want to be like that with my kids, right? So yeah, for sure. I think it can also do the opposite, right? Where it's teaching people exactly how not to be. Well, that kind of leads into the second question I've got here. So I'll put that in the chat and also say it. So in your lifetime, how have you seen men's participation, thoughts, and actions in prevention and awareness about domestic violence change and shift over time?
That is a really hard question because I went through a lot of stuff as a kid, and I see family members going through the same things. It makes me feel like things haven't changed. They have just got more secretive. It's not as, I guess even back then, maybe it wasn't as public. I just was in the middle of it, so I saw it more. And there is a big stigma as far as women. They don't want to come out and say this happened to me. I have a family member that actually went to go take family pictures and used a lot of makeup, and none of us knew what was going on behind closed doors. And it was very damaging, not just for her, but for the rest of us, the whole family. We didn't know that things were going on. We didn't see the red flags. We still to this day are trying to figure out how to get involved without damaging our personal relationships to help her get out of that relationship or to work through it or whatever she wants to do. So it's very hard to say that things have changed or awareness has gotten better. From my point of view, it hasn't. I think it really needs to. I think more men need to be involved in awareness and prevention without using violence to beget violence, kind of thing. You don't. don't use fire to put out their fire. Yet that's what I see a lot of the time is, other family members. Well, we're going to go beat up so-and-so. Like, well, is that really going to help the situation? Or are you just playing into the same thing? So yeah, to me, that's a very, very difficult question to answer.
It's men solving problems with this.
Right. Yes.
That is a difficult problem or a question to answer, I think, for me as well, because my experience has changed so much over the course of my life. Like as a kid, I didn't even know that domestic violence existed, so, and I don't think it was really on my radar until kind of midlife when I got, a master's in counseling and started working in this field. So I'm sure it was around when I was a kid. I just didn't know about it. So I'm not sure how it shifted over time. I can take some guesses, but it has become more like just over the weekend, we had a friend of the family on our porch talking about her experience with an abusive husband and just kind of providing her support, and that's been ongoing. So that wouldn't have happened when I was a kid. Maybe it's a little, and I don't know if it's being talked about more or not now. It's a good question.
I think there's an element of shame too. There's shame if you get sick. If I don't know about COVID, but people get sick and they don't want to tell people because we shame ill people, and I think we should do victim shaming. And Levi's very careful. Like, I don't want to do this at all because where I posted in the chat where I see Levi's point exactly. The only way for a victim to end that abuse is to leave. It's not like, no, we're going to go to counseling together and he's eventually going to change. Like, no, like just get away. And so that's the part where I think that kind of that education, you must leave. We must help you. We're all here. It's like the allyship. You can show yourself an ally to trans students or to Black and Latino students, and you can, if you need to leave, we believe you need to leave, and you maybe think you don't, and you maybe think it's your fault and you're ashamed of yourself. That's part of your, what happened to your self-esteem over years and years with this person. But that could be the big message. Get out, so that movie, and that we support that, and it's not your fault. Those are the things. It's sort of like a medicine for an illness. Take the medicine. It's not your fault you got sick.
I think that's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
Go on, Jeremy.
No, and I have to agree with Tom. I grew up with an amazing stepfather, my father, since I was 2, and violence just wasn't a thing that was ever taught in my family. But the thing that sticks out with me as I thought about our discussion today was not so much physical violence, but sexual violence. And being a child of the 80s in high school, we would talk about no means yes, or no means just try harder. And those are really things that were taught to us as young men in high school. It's the way she's dressed, she's asking for it. And we all know that that's wildly incorrect. But those were the lessons I learned as a young man, was more about sexual interactions with females, not so much the violence piece, and how that's changed today so drastically. And that talk is just not something I either put myself in that circle of friends where women are spoke of in that way, and that we mutual respect.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jeremy. And I would say that, sure, that's not, a fist hitting someone, but it is violence still, right? And yeah, I think with this question, I was trying to target, like, what were you taught as, I'm thinking back to middle school, and we have sex ed and things like that, and what were we taught about that kind of thing? So that's a perfect example of how women were discussed with their clothing choices and that kind of thing, that has really shifted over time, right? That's just not acceptable anymore.
Well, I can remember I was a latchkey child. Both my parents worked very hard to support the house. And so I'd get home from school at 3 and there was back-to-back episodes of MASH. And I just loved that show. But it taught me that, Alan Alda, Hawkeye in that show, disregard authority, drink a lot, and womanize. So as a middle schooler, that's what I aspired to, was be someone who disrespects leadership, drinks a lot, and then takes lots of sexual partners with really no other goal than just to have that sexual partnership.
Mentored by MASH.
Oh, geez, I can't watch that show anymore. As an adult, I instantly see through those. Like the great movies I loved of my high schools, 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, just can't watch them. They just you just see right through the irony of the time. Like, yeah, grow up. You did the crime. Be in detention for a Saturday.
Maybe that speaks to Julia's question and how we've seen this shift over time, because, that would not be acceptable as a movie anymore, or as a show. We're like frogs in the water too, that it's changing. It takes a long time to change, and it's hard to really have perspective.
Garrett, are you willing to speak about that experience that you had in high school?
About men's group?
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe there is a department in Women's Crisis who has both a women's group and a men's group that come and visit high schoolers. I was not made aware of any of this in elementary and middle school, but once I hit high school, we were allowed to have an optional activity known as men's group. I wanted to think that I was known as the Gladioline Mare, and I wanted to be the role model. That's what I was trying to get at, the role model. So I wanted to go to this group, and I learned a lot from this group, what domestic violence looked like, how to cope with domestic violence as maybe as a child of domestic violence, how to prevent domestic violence. We would make boxes to figure out what domestic violence looked like. If you were to ask me to put those things in the box again, it would be more difficult, and I would have to take time, another men's group. But as I stated, it taught me what domestic violence was. Had that group not occurred, I don't know when I would have learned about this issue, or that it was happening in my own family.
When did you said you did this in high school? What year did you graduate?
I graduated 2019.
So there is a big shift from my time to yours. I graduated exactly 20 years before that in '99. And in my high school era, there was nothing like that. And again, I had to learn the real way about what domestic violence was. And as a younger child, I wouldn't have recognized what it was, or, my mom was very good at hiding certain situations until it was too obvious and like in my face kind of thing.
It's almost as if the whole family were just a batch of frogs being boiled.
It breaks my heart to think of a mother hiding her suffering from her kids so they don't get screwed up by it, or don't think poorly of their father. The big lesson for me, and there's this great book, Half the Sky, Nicholas Christophilus and his wife wrote it. And the lesson of that book about women's lives in the third world is men are pigs. Sometimes when you look at the world around you and then when you see mothers and how they behave, and women can be guilty of this too. And so I don't mean to, but that can be I think a lesson going back to that first, men should not have such a high opinion of themselves, maybe.
Did you say the name of that book was Half the Sky?
Oh, it's Half the Sky. It's about women's lives in the third world. And the first chapter is on the sex trade, and how women in third world countries are, recruited at the age of 8 to be sweeping the floors in a brothel. So at the age of 12, they become prostitutes, and it just goes on and on and on about stories of women's lives that make you sick. There's a maternal mortality chapter. it's a hard book to read. It's upbeat. It's about women who escape because they're trying to make it that, and organizations that intervene. But it's that first chapter is my wife's never read that book because she couldn't get through that first chapter. It was so hard to read.
Mm.
Half the Sky.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to, I mean, I appreciate that, Garrett, sharing that experience. And I think you're probably the youngest person in the room. So you're our, the next generation coming up, right? That you got that experience or had the opportunity offered to you in high school to have that. So then I'm thinking, or maybe hoping that means, kids today are getting those similar experiences or similar opportunities, or maybe it's even more mainstream to where it's not optional, it's just part of the curriculum that's being offered. So
Having it be part of the curriculum would be awesome. Like instead of having this optional group activity where a handful of guys can go to this group, it would be awesome if most would participate.
absolutely, that's the kind of systemic change we need to bring these kinds of things to the forefront. Because I think, as Vern was saying, the shame that exists within it, it's a lot of people don't want to share these experiences out loud, or they feel guilty that it's happening, and they don't know how to get help, or they don't feel like they have options, or maybe they have told someone and then they were shamed. I mean, you see that generationally in families where maybe the mother tells her mother and the mother's like, but he's X, Y, or Z, so just stick with them, right? He's good enough, right? So just stick with it. Or what would you do with 3 kids on your own as a single woman, right? So those kinds of things happen too, where sometimes family members kind of maybe even unknowingly are helping the perpetrator keep the victim stuck in that relationship.
Oh, I have to agree wholeheartedly. One of my youngest child's friends, she married very young, and the husband had infidelity issues a lot. And the mom told her that's just how boys are. Yeah. So there's just no respect of the relationship there at all.
And don't you, I mean, I would imagine, as men, to hear someone say that's just how boys are, that's just how men are. I mean, that's not probably how you would like to be perceived.
No, I was gonna say that puts a whole, what is it, a stereotype on us that I promise we're not all like that.
But when in a group of men, to stand up and say, if somebody makes a comment or say, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or, it's that's the kind of work that's important, and that takes some time to get used to, some commitment. Because we're not all like that, but oftentimes in a circle of like men's men, or whatever. It's kind of a weird phrase, but I've noticed in my circle of men, more in their 50s, it's more common for people to stand up and be like, hey, dude, that's making me really uncomfortable, so it is becoming more common and acceptable. And people are like, oh God, I didn't even mean to. I'm like, sorry. And they have a little self-reflection, but it's kind of this habit that people develop.
That's a great story, Tom. It's hard to be that first guy in your group to say, when somebody makes some comment, somebody makes a racist comment, I'm going to be on it. But somebody who says something about a woman that's disparaging or demeaning, and I just don't know how to step right up and say, you need to be more respectful of I don't know. It's a hard first, because they're going to look at you like, what's happening?
Right. And in my circle of friends, it's oftentimes the men who have daughters.
Oh.
Who finally get it. And they're like, whoa,
Right.
Don't talk about, women like that, or so it takes having that empathy and understanding.
It also helps to have that friend group that is appropriate in mind. I can't think of any event in time where I would be hanging out with my friends with ASG or my coworkers. We all know it's unacceptable to be ludicrous in that way.
Okay, I think I'm gonna skip question number 3 because I feel like we really touched on it, and I'm gonna go to question number 4.
Can we at least know what it was?
Yeah, so question 3 was, what were you taught about domestic violence growing up, and does that differ from what you now know or believe about domestic violence? And what do we need to teach the next generation of men about domestic violence?
Thank you.
So I feel like we kind of covered that. So question number 4, which I think segues nicely into what we kind of were just touching on. Sometimes men get painted with a brush that dismisses sexually explicit and or violent talk and behavior as, quote, boys being boys. How do you feel when that happens? And what do you think men need to do to combat the perception that all men behave this way?
It really irks me today to have that statement said to me. And I think where I really it hit nail on the head was Jordan Klepper, who was a comedic news journalist, went to women at Trump rallies and asked them about the famous bus talk. And I don't want to go into detail what Trump said. I think we all know. I don't want to say that out loud today. But the women at the Trump rally who are wearing American flags, and Trump said, "Oh, that's just boys being boys. It's totally acceptable." And it just really struck a nerve with me. Like, no, that's not acceptable behavior ever. No matter how much money you have or how much political power or clout you take, that's just not acceptable. And that boys being boys drove home, and when the friend of my youngest daughter said, "My mom said this," I was really like, that's not how we act. You can stay with us, we'll keep you safe, but that's not how any man should be, or any boy should act that way. I muted myself, drives me crazy. Okay.
I mean, I think you speak to something important there, Jeremy, and that's that we're all in this culture together, and it permeates, everybody to some degree or another. So, but that's a great example of how well it does permeate everybody.
And how quickly we are to just dismiss bad behavior or really reputable behavior because, oh, that he's just being one of the boys. Like, no, hold yourself to a higher standard. Really act like you're supposed to and treat everybody equally, and have some respect for everybody just trying to go through and make the best of their lives.
Yeah, that's a real cop out, the boys being boys thing. I'm just thinking about it right now. Like, what a great cop out. Oh, we're just being guys, It's like, that's okay.
That whole
So-
Trump thing, it was locker room talk is what they talked about. That's what men do in the locker room. They say these kind of things. It doesn't have any real meaning.
Another thing is that sentence, boys being boys, we need to change the meaning behind it, because there are times when little boys do stupid stuff. That's that right there, that's what I recognize boys being boys. Never should an adult teen or an adult be referenced as a boy.
I was going to kind of say something along the same line. I have a 16-year-old son, and he's done some silly things. Of course, they're not sexually explicit or violent. I went on a trip, and he took my car for a joyride, and I dismissed that as, I didn't necessarily do the same thing as a teenager, but I did something very similar. I had other family members that did something. Even the police officer that gave him the ticket said, I was a teenager once as well. So it got pushed off as boys being boys. And I think that in some scenarios that saying is appropriate, because sometimes we do have to learn the hard lessons. When it does come to, being sexually explicit or talking down about women or how they're just an object, or violence, you know, any of those things. I think that, yeah, some of us do need to stand up and change that behavior and say, look, you know, you got a mom, you got a sister, would you like somebody thinking about them and that? Well, no. Well, then have the same respect for all women, you know. So yeah, I think that standing up in certain situations or in other situations, just leaving it alone and being like, yeah, he had to learn that lesson.
And maybe too, a better way of saying it is that's a kid being a kid, right? It's not about him being a boy or her being a girl or whatever, right? It's just about kids doing kid things and needing to learn lessons about that. And whereas like, I think, you know, and for me, I also graduated in 99, and I just think about how that was a very acceptable statement when I was growing up, right? Oh, it's just boys. And then as a woman, it's like, well, what does that mean for, like, I don't get any passes about any mistakes I make, or like it's not okay for me to act like a kid, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between saying those are just kids making kid mistakes or youth mistakes or however you might want to say it, versus like, oh, that's a boy thing, you know?
It's funny, I was just thinking of that, Julia, about how male transgression versus female. And so when my son was like 14 or 15, he snuck out of the house. I've heard since that they did this all the time, him and his sister. And, you know, we were a 3-bedroom house, so they could sneak right out the front door. They didn't have to climb out the window. And so he made a little version of himself in the bed because he's going to see a girl, and they went to the movies. And so we find out it's laughably bad. And then my wife's on the phone, calls him, "Where are you?" And she is so pissed. And Vern, go get him. And I went there, and he was sad and pathetic, and he wanted to see a movie with this girl. So I gave him $20 to pay for the movie, and came home, and it was like, well, what else can I do? And it occurred, I can't remember where, I just remember the memory where we were talking this through, where if I'd heard my daughter had snuck out, I would have had a different, I mean, now I think it's silly, but at the time I'm like, oh, no, I'd be the one that's angry. You go get her. And that's because boys will be boys means boys can transgress hugely, break the law, you know, steal a car, whatever, and we'll just let it off. Well, you know, and there's that infamous now example of the weird kid that raped a sleeping woman down in California, and the judge was so afraid of ruining his life, he gave him a 6-month sentence for rape. And that is the extreme edge of boys transgress. Hey, it's a mistake they made. Let's give them a pass. And hearing you say that, Julia, like I never had those passes. we all have a get out of jail free deck of cards, and we don't let girls transgress.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about parents maybe being like in one way, what for a girl or a woman might feel overprotective, like, oh, my brothers got away with that, or they didn't worry so much about my brothers sneaking out or doing X, Y, or Z, like that all kids do. And gotta love that, right? Setting the bed up just right so it looks like there's a sleeping body in there, just in case mom or dad peeks in on you.
The Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, it's so correct. And in high school, the boy who had a sexual relationship with a female was a hero, and we all looked up to him. But the female was just a, you know, seen in very poor light with be called names.
Absolutely. And also, you know, the idea, like, and I know we use this in society a lot, and I myself have used it, of like, imagine if you were, you know, imagine if it was your mom or your aunt or your sister, because we all have women in our lives for the most part, right? But also I really want to put the idea out there of we shouldn't have to have a woman in our lives to respect women, right? We shouldn't have to have a daughter or a mother or an aunt to then be able to say, oh yeah, I wouldn't want that to happen to them, so I'm gonna, you know, speak up or say something, right? Like we just should, because women are people too.
Yeah, maybe over time, I think it's happening slowly, or maybe it's just happening more in my life that I'm seeing it. But over time, hopefully, you know, women can really realize the great respect, like women kind of make us look like pretty useless in many ways, you know? Women, there's so many reasons to respect women, and they're so resilient and strong. And it's just, it's kind of like, it's almost been like this conspiracy among men or something. Like, I mean, I was never told about it, but like, okay, let's just keep them down and talk trash about them, because we all know that, you know, we're not that great or something. But it is kind of funny that we're even having this discussion, like that women should be held up to at least the same, you know, accolades as men, or given the same rights to mess up. Like, it speaks volumes that we're even talking about it.
Well, I think that, you know, going along those lines, actually, that there are certain things that men and women, or boys and girls, do need to be treated differently, especially in our days and age. So my boy is 16, my girl is 14, and she did basically what Vern was talking about as far as sneaking out of the house. She said she was staying over at a friend's house. Her friend said to her parents that she was staying at our house. You know, classic maneuver. And so I, you know, had a little bit of respect in the sense that she's only 14 and she's figuring this out. Anyway, phone location. She turned her phone location off when we tried to find out where she was. And, you know, we had to sit down and talk to her, and that phone location isn't to get her in trouble, it's to keep her out of trouble. I didn't get overly upset because, again, if my son had done it, how upset would I have been? But my daughter doing it, there's a lot more dangers out there for her than there is for him. Yes, I'd get upset either way, but I think with my daughter, I probably was more upset along the lines of, I don't think anybody's gonna grab my 16-year-old 6.5-foot son for sex trafficking. Whereas my daughter, they most certainly would. And so, you know, there are some scenarios where, because of their gender, they have to be treated a little bit differently.
Yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And you're right. So being a woman out, you know, walking around, I'm always aware of what's happening, you know. And I was just mentioning how I'm going to be walking, I'm doing something at SOU over the course of fall term, and I'm going to be having to walk to my car in the dark. And I'm nervous about that. And I'm like, I don't really know if SOU has security like RCC does, where I can call and say, can you walk me from the building to my office? And I was telling a man about that, and he was like, you'll be fine. And I'm like, easy for you to say that I'll be fine. You know, you don't have to worry about what that experience is like, and if someone's following me or whatever. So I can hear what you're saying, that there are society, and again, that just really speaks to that systemic issue, right? Of like, it's really unfortunate that that's the truth of how we have to live, right? But that is the truth of what we're living in right now. Okay, so we're getting close on time. How about we end with just this last question here, because I think we could probably come up with some good ideas. What are ways, big or small, that men can promote change and prevention of domestic violence?
Ooh, I want to start this off. Getting an email and actually responding to it, and being involved with just talking to other men about how to change things, becoming more aware of what's going on in our society, being involved. Of course, some of the perpetrators of domestic violence aren't going to do this kind of thing, but maybe they're in recovery and they do want to learn more and do want to change their behavior. I think that, yeah, just being more aware of what's going on and getting involved in positive aspects of this. I think this kind of thing is, as long as it kept growing and becoming a bigger thing, that it could really make a change.
Yeah, and I'd say, to step in, even if it's an imperfect response, to at least respond when we see something, and we will see something. Just remembering before I was a counselor, I built houses and I ran construction crews. And on one of my crews, there was this guy, he was a Marine. He was actually a pretty good friend of mine, or, a work buddy, but some Marine was walking by and I just overheard them talking about sexual violence in the Marine Corps. Like, I don't even remember specifically what it was, but it just super pissed me off. And I just kind of outed that conversation and what they were saying in a very loud way on the whole site, and kind of shamed them, and was like, Bart, you have daughters, like what the, 1 in 3, I just kind of went off, and it was like super awkward, and it was not a perfect response, but at least it was a response rather than just be like, okay, move on. So I just encourage all of us to just respond in some way, little, big, whatever. If we can commit to do that as men, that makes a big difference.
One
Oh, go ahead.
One technique that I put to practice is, as I said, this is something that someone would have to develop, but I like to imagine that at all times I'm being watched by my relatives. Not to make this Christian or anything, but what would Jesus think? Like, constantly, corny, stupid. I always make sure that my actions are not invalid, that I need to make sure I make the correct and proper decisions. Because what would they think of me? I can't ever make horrible decisions because there is a possibility that they will find out, and it's unacceptable.
I just keep thinking about my university orientation, and I lived in the dorms my first year of the university, and it was a co-ed dorm, floor of men, floor of women, whatnot. And it came to the walking on campus at nighttime, and they told the group of men and women to not yell rape or help, but to yell fire, because people would respond better to that. And it worries me as a society that if a woman's being, or anybody's being sexually assaulted and they yell rape, that I wouldn't pay attention to it, but I would have fire. So it needs to start at home with ourselves, that we begin to make these changes we want to see in our society. And it takes, corny, a village to raise. So, how many times we walk in a parking lot and there's a car alarm going off and we don't even look? That's like, it's just someone's horns honking. Maybe I should start looking. And I have a voice, the courage to have the voice to step in where I'm needed.
Because it could be that panic button that somebody's hitting. I never even thought of that. That is a great point, that we do ignore certain things in society when we're walking through a parking lot. And yeah, I definitely am going to be more aware of my surroundings after this conversation.
It goes back to that woman who was sexually assaulted in New York City, that all the people heard her screaming in their apartments, but like, someone else will call 911, someone else will handle this, I don't want to get involved. But if you yell fire, that impacts everybody, so they're much more likely to get involved.
And she was murdered, Jeremy. That story, she was murdered. She was stabbed.
Oh, I think she spent all night out in the cold and then died of the elements from her attack. Yeah.
I think education too. This is why I think you have a month of this, because think of the much maligned critical race theory, and why would somebody not want the history of race relations and slavery and lynchings and Jim Crow laws and segregation? Why not teach that? And on the surface, well, because I want people to have a positive view of our country, but it's also so that you don't have an understanding of what it's like to be Black in America, or you have none whatsoever. So you don't know, there is no real problem with racism. You don't know what police violence is. You want to bury your head in the sand. And I don't know that there's that response to domestic violence. I don't think there's a whole bunch of men saying, but I still could see, to Garrett's point, like, what if there were required, class or a session where we talk about it, the school required everybody to attend. I wonder what the uproar, I bet you'd find that some people in the community think this is inappropriate. And then, I mean, I don't mean they're all evil for saying that, but it's if you learn about it, if it becomes common, then we're not surprised when somebody says, oh yeah, it sucks to be Black in America because of this. Or it kind of, when you're a woman and you're walking around campus at night, you feel that there are predatory men out there, and men need to hear that, and we all need to know that, and it's got to become common to educate people about domestic violence, about violence against women, about what it feels like to be a woman in the world, and what it feels like to be a Black person in America, and get over yourself. And because you know what, the more you read this book, the one I told you, Half the Sky, which is about a bunch of things, you have a real sense of shame for your gender, and nobody wants that. They want to feel like, oh, I'm a white male, and I like being the most important person in the room. And maybe I think more education would be key.
Well, I gotta say, as far as the racial part of that, I definitely learned a lot from your class. What riding my bike taught me about racism. That was a wonderful piece, and I agree with you. If there was something out there that helped us see from a different point of view, a different perspective on how it is to be a woman, or how it is to be in a domestic violence situation, or to be the prey instead of feeling, like you said, being the most powerful one in the room, or I think learning about how to look at things from a different perspective and have that empathy for them could help our society in general. Yeah.
I think maybe I might forget like that, and just I have my own lived experience as a woman, and so that doesn't mean every other woman's experience is going to be like mine. And if we're talking about race too, particularly women of color are going to be dealing with a whole nother set of issues than what I'm faced with. But I forget maybe that men might not understand why I'm afraid to walk in the dark from a building to my car that's quite a ways away. It's just, for me, that's just a natural response. And I forget that, oh, men, maybe like a certain type of man doesn't have to worry about that. I think there's other men probably that might have some concerns, but and so yeah, that's a good reminder for me, I think, of like that's why these conversations are important, just the mutual learning, I think, that happens in these types of conversations. Okay, well, I think we're gonna call it there. I sincerely appreciate your time, your effort, your energy, your thoughts on this subject. And please visit the Rogue app, because that's where we're going to be doing stuff over the course of the month. Hopefully today I'm going to be able to post an intro about Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and then our contest for students will be there, but also I'm really encouraging staff and faculty to participate and join on our counseling webpage, which is not live yet, but it should be hopefully within the next day or two. There will be a pledge that you can sign, and you can take a picture of that and post it to the app. That's one of the things we're doing for the contest for students, but I would love staff and faculty, particularly men, to be posting that if they feel so inclined. So these things are going to be out there, and hopefully we'll get some participation. This Wednesday, we're going to have our first Awareness Wednesday. So wear purple, take a selfie, post it on the app, and just show your support. Okay, everyone, I appreciate you so much, and I'm going to stop our recording.